Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you like this episode, please remember to hit the like button and leave a comment or two, then subscribe and click on the bell to receive notifications of whenever we release new videos. Also, please remember to share them to your social media. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to Beatty Gulch near Gardner, Montana. This area is a high wooded plateau that slopes up to the west, rising to over 7,500 feet in elevation. Beatty Gulch has pine, fir, and spruce trees scattered across a broad slope with a steep, brushy gully along the creek. Visibility is good in most places here, as the trees are far apart and the ground is covered with grass and sagebrush for the most part. Yellowstone National Park borders the gulch just a few hundred yards to the south. It is prime grizzly bear habitat that offers elk, white-tailed deer, and moose for prey. Other predators in this area include cougars, wolves, coyotes, bobcats, and black bears. Many of Montana's residents are frequent hunters, and accessing the border around Yellowstone National Park is a key place to find animals. Deer, moose, and elk leave the safety and security of the park and wander in search of mates or food across its boundaries and into adjoining hunting units. This allows hunters who are aware of the park boundaries the opportunity to harvest game animals and fill their freezers with delicious elk, moose, and deer meat. Wildlife agencies indicate that there are 2,100 grizzly bears in western Montana, with the majority of those bears living in or near Glacier National Park in the northwest portion of the state. This leaves around 1,000 grizzlies broadly distributed over the rest of the state. Population densities of grizzly bears here average one bear for every 25 square miles. This may not seem very high, but given the amount of room and resources grizzlies require for their existence, the bears are in a state of overpopulation in ecosystems that support them. Grizzlies in this area used to have an abundant source of fat and nutrients delivered to any body of water in their habitat. Seasonal salmon runs would provide valued nourishment to the entire ecosystem and help the bears grow fat for hibernation. In the late 1940s, the construction of dams, the presence of pollution, and overfishing caused seasonal salmon runs to stop altogether. Since the 1980s, salmon reintroduction efforts have been met with a limited amount of success, but may never be restored to their previous levels, which supported bear populations. The absence of salmon has forced bears to find alternate sources of calories, which they defend aggressively from any intruder. On Tuesday, September 26, 2023, a hunter whom we will call Nick was pursuing game in Beatty Gulch. Game animals are plentiful here, and sign of their presence covers the landscape as they move to find food and mates. Nick was aware the grizzlies were in the area in which he was hunting. He continually searched for signs of bear activity, such as scat or torn-up stumps. He had no way of anticipating the frightening and dangerous events that would unfold on this fateful day. As Nick hiked along the relatively clear slope of the gulch, he kept his eyes up and scanned for the flick of an ear or the telltale yellow and white patch on their rumps. He eagerly hoped for a nice trophy animal with a big body to materialize before his eyes. They are like ghosts here and can appear and disappear seemingly at whim, and finding them is frequently a pleasant surprise. Just as Nick rounded a small rise in the slope of the gulch, a large brown mass appeared just a short distance away. At first glance, it appeared to be a stump from a long-dead tree, but then it moved. Right before Nick's eyes, the stump grew a large head, revealing the distinct profile of a grizzly bear. Its dish-shaped face and huge hump of muscle on its shoulders proved to be the most ominous signs of the one animal Nick did not want to run into during his hunt. As soon as the bear lifted its head, it looked right at Nick. The bear immediately began charging toward the hunter. Nick's heart sank as he knew this was no bluff charge. He could see a large mound of sticks and dirt scraped up behind the bear as it bore down on him. He knew he had to act quickly to keep himself from harm and possibly save his own life. Nick yelled at the bear and quickly raised his hunting rifle to his shoulder. He prepared for the worst and clicked off the safety. The bear was closing in on him from less than 50 yards, and he didn't have a lot of time to react. As he watched the bear flowing toward him, he could see its fur bounce with each bound and muscles ripple as they absorbed the energy of each stride. Its head was high and steady as its eyes fixed on Nick's face. By the time the bear closed to within 20 yards, Nick had decided to fire his hunting rifle. He tried to time the pull of the trigger of his hunting rifle with the gentle bouncing of the grizzly's head. Once the sights of his rifle and the bear's head lined up, he pulled the trigger. His body jerked as the rifle roared in reaction to the man's will. The bullet tore its path like a destructive affliction and smashed its way through the bear's skull. As soon as the energy of the bullet overwhelmed the protective structure of the bear's skull, Nick watched the bear's head drop toward the ground. The bear's body tumbled and then skidded to a stop only a few yards from Nick's feet. Nick knew that he had narrowly avoided being maimed by the bear, and that he had to get a hold of authorities to report the details of the incident. They would want to know the circumstances surrounding the bear's death, and would expect his cooperation to fully understand the contributing factors of this incident. The only scars Nick would take away from this run-in with the grizzly would be the nagging questions of alternate outcomes that would wake him up on restless nights. This grizzly was one of 3 bears killed by sportsmen while defending themselves in the outdoors in the month of September in Montana, 2023. This trend is one of the most alarming and concerning issues faced by states that make up grizzly territory. After a thorough investigation, authorities concluded that the portrayal of events presented by Nick was supported by the forensic evidence collected at the attack scene. They also confirmed that the bear was defending a food cache containing an animal it had stashed for consumption. The grizzly was merely acting in defense of a valued and needed resource for its survival, even though the outcome could easily have been profoundly harmful and damaging to Nick's life and health. The evidence showed that there were no cubs observed at the scene, nor was there evidence of them being in the area. There was no cub tracks or orphaned grizzly cubs located in subsequent weeks. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I'm left with a few questions for you. Do you think bear spray may have changed the outcome of this attack? What more could Nick have done to avoid the conflict with this grizzly? Was this bear looking to make a meal out of Nick, or was it simply defending its food cache? What would you do if you were surprised by a charging grizzly in open country? I'll be glad to read your thoughts, so please post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. I enjoy seeing where our viewers are from, so I would like to invite you to post the flag of your nation, state, or province in the comments section of this video. Today's episode takes us to the small town of Island Park, Idaho. The geography of this area is rolling hills covered in dense stands of pine, fir, and spruce trees, split by undulating waves of grasses and sagebrush. The elevation here is over 7,000 feet, and the winters are extremely cold with frequent accumulations of snow. The summers are nearly always hot and dry, creating a season of feast and famine for all animals in the area. There are plenty of berry bushes here, and along any given body of water you will see dense pockets of willow. Yellowstone National Park is only a stone's throw away, so there's always a constant ebbing and flowing of moose, deer, and elk based on seasonal demand. The predators of this area are a murderer's row of deadly and cunning carnivores. Wolves, cougars, coyotes, and bobcats, along with black bears, are seen regularly, but the most dangerous of predators, the grizzlies, are much more elusive and stealthy than the others. Island Park is located near Henry's Fork, which is a tributary of the Snake River. It is a world-class fly fishing destination for the beautiful rainbow trout that populate the streams here. The Continental Divide is a few miles north of the town and divides the waters flowing west into the Columbia River system and the east flowing into the Mississippi River system. This very rugged and remote area is a hotbed of grizzly and human conflicts, which are beginning to come to a head. In the early morning hours of Thursday, September 23, 2021, 2 archery hunters, whom we will call Tom and Don, were pursuing elk near Stump Meadows. The heavily timbered hills give way to broad meadows of grass, on which bull elk strut to put on a show to attract cows who are ready to breed. Elk are grazers, which means they eat grass, as opposed to being browsers like deer and moose. Browsers dine on the shoots, leaves, and stems of various bushes and trees. The growth of grasses in Stump Meadows make it a prime habitat for elk during a time of year that is demanding for them. As Tom and Don stalked their way along the edge of the meadow, they kept a wary eye out for grizzly bear sign. Tracks are far too common in this area, so seeing them isn't necessarily proof of a grizzly being in the immediate area. Given the bear's tendency to travel many miles in a given day, once you see a track, even if it's fresh, it isn't always correct to assume the grizzly is still nearby. Other forms of evidence of grizzly bear activity, like seeing stumps torn apart or anthills that have been dug up along with the grizzly bear tracks nearby, are a harbinger that grizzlies regularly seek food in this area. When they find a reliable location for food, grizzlies are known to frequently return on a regular pattern in search of more. As the archery hunters paralleled the tree line, they unknowingly walked within several yards of a hungry and very territorial sow grizzly bear, who took defending her cubs from any perceived threat very seriously. Don was armed with a 10mm semi-automatic pistol, and Tom carried a primed can of bear spray for protection. As the hunters encroached on the sow's hiding spot, which was a thick stand of low-growing jack pines, she sprang upon the men in a lightning-quick ambush. The sow emerged from cover only a few yards from the hunters and quickly closed the short distance in what seemed like an instant. Even though both men were completely surprised by the ambush, the knowledge of being in grizzly bear territory had them mentally prepared to defend themselves. Don immediately reached his hand toward his pistol, while Tom wrapped his hands around his bear spray canister. By the time the sow had approached to within 10 yards, Don began firing his pistol. As he heard his partner's shots ring out, Tom flicked the safety cap from the top of his bear spray canister and let loose that hellish orange cloud of billowing burning. As the sow was impacted by the bullets of Don's pistol, she was likely momentarily confused by the presence of two targets. The fact that bear spray was correctly dispensed didn't help her cause, as the noxious cloud began to irritate her eyes and nose. Her lungs filled with the burning concoction, and her breathing was replaced with coughs and gagging. Had the temperatures been lower, the propellant qualities of the bear spray canister would likely have rendered the irritant non-functional and ineffective. Don's accuracy must have been lethal, because the bullets fired from his pistol took their toll on the sow. After having several 10mm-sized holes punched through vital areas of her anatomy, the sow breathed her last and gave up her grisly ghost. As the pistol shots stopped echoing through the valley, Don and Tom could see two grizzly bear cubs scampering through the brush. Now without their mother and sole protector, they did the only thing they knew to do, and bolted for cover. The cubs' mother had taught them well in her brief time with them, but now, without her, their future would be bleak, if not unsustainable. Tom and Don knew that the events that had transpired would be analyzed, critiqued, and questioned by well-intending state and federal investigators. It was a good thing for the archery hunters that the terrain in this area was rolling as opposed to being steep. This allowed them to reach out to game wardens via their cell phones and request that they hear the details of the run-in with the sow and her cubs. Wardens from the Idaho Fish and Game arrived on the scene around 8:30 a.m., immediately followed by federal wardens. Tom and Don explained the details of the incident and made sure to pass on that the sow's two cubs were still out there. During their investigation of the archery hunters' claims pertaining to the attack, federal and state agencies clearly acknowledged that this grizzly sow was killed in self-defense. They also initiated a broad and comprehensive search for the orphaned cubs. The fact that the government wardens initiated a search is proof that the cubs must have been born this past spring. If they were from the prior spring, it would have been assumed that they may have been able to make it through the winter on their own, and likely too wary of humans to be easily caught. If they were found before a boar grizz found them, they could be safely captured and transported to the Island Park Grizzly and Wolf Discovery Center. Orphaned grizzly cubs are raised in safe and secure enclosures at this facility and serve as a real-life example for visitors to learn about grizzlies. Although the search didn't find the cubs, the investigation found that Don and Tom did not violate any state or national laws. They were found to have acted solely in self-defense and were not charged with any crimes, nor were they cited for any violations. Tom and Don's grizzly attack is not the only incident in Stamp's Meadows between grizzlies and humans in recent years. On July 9, 2021, a trail runner from Maryland was jogging when he ran into a sow and her cub. She knocked him to the ground and bit him several times before dashing back into the brush with her cub. The runner sought and received medical help from Madison Memorial Hospital in nearby Rexburg, Idaho. Later that same month, a man was mountain biking past Stamp Meadows. As he sped down the trail, a sow grizzly and her cub charged at him as he passed a clump of brush. Fortunately, he was going too fast for the bears to catch up with him, and he got away without an injury. As a follow-up to the previously mentioned confrontations on the evening of September 1, 2023, two archery hunters were sneaking through the dense brush just west of Island Park Reservoir. Both of the bow hunters were armed with pistols and managed to pull them out before a giant grizzly boar could close the distance between them. They fired several shots into the massive mauler and introduced him to his angels before he could harm either of them. They called into the Fremont County Dispatch to file a report relaying the facts surrounding their altercation with the big and angry grizz. Following the thorough investigation, the archery hunters were found to have acted in self-defense and were not charged with any infractions. If you remember a few episodes prior to this one, I mentioned that both of my teenage sons drew bull moose tags in the hunting unit that includes Island Park. I commented on how we'd seen no moose, bulls or cows, in over 3 weeks of hunting in 3 different months. We did, however, see a multitude of grizzly bear tracks, and even followed a grizzly bear from an uncomfortable distance of only 150 yards for over 20 minutes. I mention this because it is apparent through my own experiences in this area that not only are the grizzlies here aggressive toward people, but they're currently overburdening their habitat's carrying capacity. When a visitor can find grizzly bears roaming between 2 highways in broad daylight, the way my sons and I did, then they are clearly being mismanaged. This trend line can only lead to more attacks and deaths on both sides of each species. After reviewing the short list of incidents involving hostile grizzlies and human beings, it is clear that the aggressive grizzly bears near Island Park, Idaho, take exception to the presence of people being near their cubs, food caches, and their territory more than any other grizzly population in the world. What could possibly be making this population of grizzlies so defensive or offensive to human presence? After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I have a few questions for you. Do you think there is an environmental factor that causes grizzlies around Island Park to be more hostile toward the presence of humans? If salmon migrations were reestablished, would this reduce human and grizzly confrontations? Is the lack of management, including hunting seasons or hazing seasons, creating an untenable and dangerous situation around Island Park, Idaho? Would you consider it worth the risk to catch a giant rainbow trout in the Henry's Fork and possibly be attacked by a grizzly who didn't appreciate your penchant for fly fishing? I will enjoy reading and responding to your thoughts, so please post them in the comment section below and let's talk about it. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to a familiar place on this channel and too close to home for me personally. We're discussing a grizzly attack which happened near Sautel Peak, just north of Island Park, Idaho. The Montana border is a stone's throw away, since it is the watershed on the next hill to the west. When you think of high country, pictures of this kind of area may come to mind, given its elevation is between 7,000 and 8,000 feet, depending on where you're located on the mountain. At the foot of Sautel Peak lies uninterrupted miles of pine, fir, and spruce tree forest, and through it winds the Henry's Fork of the Snake River and the world-class trout fly fishing it offers. Common animals here include moose, elk, and mule deer. The predators here include bobcat, black bear, coyotes, cougars, and wolves, but the ever-increasing grizzly bear population is what is the focus of our discussion today. About 15 miles east is the boundary of Yellowstone National Park, and given nothing but mountains and forest lay between here and there, it isn't difficult to imagine grizzlies wandering out of the park in search of food or their own territory to claim. In fact, the year of 2015 had been a bumper crop for bear complaints. The Fremont County Sheriff's Office had fielded numerous calls from concerned citizens reporting grizzly sightings throughout the summer. The Idaho Fish and Game had to work in conjunction with federal agents to put down a 25-year-old male grizzly who had been breaking into outbuildings around Island Park recently. They said that judging by his age and appearance, he was no longer able to forage for his typical fare. He was led into human areas by competition over prime areas and by starvation. By fall time, archery season rolls around and elk and deer hunters dust off their camouflage and bows to sneak through the woods to try to bag some meat for the winter. To be successful at archery hunting, you not only have to be stealthy, you also have to move silently, or at least quietly, if you want to stay undetected by wary prey animals, and even then it isn't guaranteed. The senses of hearing and smell of deer and elk have adeptly detected predators before they can present any danger to their lives for untold eons. The success of the species is proof of that theory. In the early morning hours of Monday, August 31st, 2015, 55-year-old Mike Adams was putting the sneak on some elk on the slopes of Sautel Peak. The prior days had brought a heavy rain, and the creek nearby was loudly babbling, drowning out any other noises. Mike was an avid bow hunter and lived in Idaho Falls, a few hours south along the freeway. In years when Labor Day falls toward the end of the first week of September, Idaho bow hunters can enjoy an opening day weekend without the holiday crowds, and this is exactly what Mike was doing. Given his relatively remote location, he likely had the entire mountain all to himself, minus whatever other archery hunters who may have been around. Now Mike was no greenhorn, nor was he unaware of the possibility of running into the area's grizzly bears. He was left-handed, so he placed his bear spray holster on his left hip and his .44 Magnum pistol on his right one. As he quietly slipped through the shadows of the dark timber, there is no way Mike could have known that he was getting danger close to a deer carcass that a hungry mama grizzly had cached and was now protecting with every bit of the power and fury her species is known for. A sudden snap drew Mike's attention away from scanning the timber for the elk he was trailing. As he swung his head in the direction of the snap, his vision was filled with the terrifying sight of a massive sow grizzly closing in on him from his left and only a few yards away. His heart sank in his chest even further when he saw her 3 cubs trailing not far behind. Before Mike had so much as let out a grunt, the sow had latched her powerful jaws onto his left forearm. The impact of her attack had knocked him around, and he couldn't reach his bear spray across his body with his free right hand. The only thing he could do was reach for his pistol. As the angry sow jostled Mike around and tore into his flesh on his forearm, he attempted to pull his pistol from his hip holster. He could feel the immense pressure of her jaws on his bones, and her 2-inch teeth painfully tore nickel-sized holes through his flesh. Each time she bit, she pulled him toward her and tossed her head, which took him off balance. Then she would bite into his forearm in a different place. Each time he grabbed for his pistol, she would jerk him around, making his attempts at gripping his pistol impossible. After several seconds, Mike was able to grasp the pistol grip of his .44 Magnum, and from point-blank range fired off several shots in quick succession. The sow and her cubs scampered through the brush in a scattered retreat, frightened away by the repeated roar of the pistol. For a few seconds after watching the sow and her cubs flee, Mike was stunned and tried to collect himself. He was certain at least a few of his rounds had hit the sow, especially given she was biting on his other arm. His forearm was bleeding and painful, but the bear only managed to bite him there, though she had done so several times. She had missed swatting him with her paws, otherwise his injuries would have been much more severe, if not fatal. Mike was by himself when he set out, and knew there was no one nearby to call on for help. He did have one possible way to reach out, though, and he used his right hand to retrieve his cell phone from his pocket. Mike pressed the button on it and checked the service bars to see if he would get enough reception to complete a call to 911, and then dialed. The emergency response system had recently included a remarkable update to its services. They used his cell signal to pinpoint his location on a map and guided him through several miles of the Caribou-Targhee National Forest on a direct path to an ambulance at a nearby road. The waiting medics got to work bandaging Mike's wounds to slow the bleeding and loaded him aboard. They sped toward the Madison Memorial Hospital in Rexburg, Idaho, about 50 miles to the south as the crow flies. Once Mike arrived there, the staff cleaned his wounds and wheeled him into the X-ray station, where they examined the bones of his forearm. Fortunately for Mike, none of his arm bones were broken, and his wounds were closed with sutures and bandaged. Mike's wounds were noted to be several bites on his left forearm and tears in some of the muscle and skin from the sow tossing her head after she bit him. His left hand was also chewed up pretty good, but after receiving treatment, Mike was released to heal at home. Following Mike's attack, investigators made the trip to the GPS location of his attack. They really needed to know if they had a wounded grizzly on their hands, and would have to dispatch her, and possibly her cubs if they determined she'd been wounded. Upon arriving at the attack site, they found Mike's hat that had been shaken from his head during the attack. They also found the cached deer carcass and the sow's tracks as she attacked Mike. The area was scoured for 6 hours while they searched for any evidence that the bullets fired from Mike's .44 Magnum had struck the sow or one of her cubs. The size of the pistol would make a hell of a wound, so there should be fur and blood spatter on the ground, but they found none. After determining Mike's shots had somehow missed striking the grizzly entirely, they determined she was likely not wounded. Given her attack was centered around defending a cached deer carcass, as well as protecting her 3 cubs, they deemed her attack a defensive one.
They decided to take no action against the sow, given her actions or reactions were expected grizzly bear behavior given the circumstances. Mike eventually made a full recovery, but I could find no source indicating if he had ever returned to archery hunting. He was not charged with any violation resulting from the investigation of his attack. The 19,000 square mile area around Yellowstone National Park is said to host 757 grizzly bears, which are still listed as endangered. Many residents and some scientists state that the area is above maximum carrying capacity for grizzly bears, and that they are now spreading into areas of Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming that they've not been for decades. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I'm left with a few questions for you. How do you think it's possible that Mike missed the bear with every single shot he fired from point-blank range? Do you think you would stand a chance of hitting the grizzly while shooting from that range? Is archery hunting in grizzly territory a risk you'd be willing to take? As prepared as Mike was for a run-in with a bear, what more could he have done to prevent or avoid it? The next time you're sneaking through the woods and you hear a twig snap, will the story of Mike's grizzly bear attack come back to your mind? I'll be glad to read your thoughts, so please post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it.
Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider clicking on the like button and clicking on the bell icon. We'll help you know when we post our new episodes. Posting our video links to your social media profiles furthers awareness, and it's fun. We slashed our prices in our merch store, linked below, so check out the bargains there while you shop. As a member of our human community, remember to adventure bravely and be careful out there, especially in bear country.